We start with a major breakthrough in the Middle East. Nearly 2 months after their worst nightmare began, a sigh of relief for the families of 50 women and children held hostage by Hamas. In the early hours of Wednesday, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu announced a hard-fought deal that will see the release of 50 hostages in return for a 4-day truce, as well as the release of 150 Palestinian prisoners. The pause in fighting will also allow for humanitarian aid and fuel to enter the Gaza Strip. Now, Qatar, which helped broker the agreement, said the starting time of the truce would be announced within the next 24 hours. Now, under the agreement, Hamas is set to free 50 of the hostages it took in the October 7th terror attack on Israel. In exchange, around 150 Palestinian prisoners held in Israel will also be set free. And as part of the deal, there will be a pause in fighting between Israel and Hamas for 4 days and access to humanitarian aid. Israel has also said it would extend the truce if additional hostages are released. And we're going to go straight to our correspondent, Rebecca Ritters in Jerusalem. Rebecca, what more can you tell us about this hostage deal and ceasefire?
Well, it was a much-awaited deal, as you mentioned. You talked about a lot of the details there. We're talking about 50 hostages, women and children. The breakdown, we think, appears to be 30 children, 12 mothers and 8 women, and priority, of course, being given to the elderly and infirm. We know that this is in exchange for what looks to be a 4-day ceasefire in hostilities, for humanitarian aid to be allowed into the Strip, and also for the coordination of the release of these hostages. We know that also Israel has agreed to release 150. That's a 3-to-1 ratio for the hostages, 3 Palestinian prisoners for every 1 hostage released. So we're looking at about 150, also women and children, Palestinian prisoners, that will be released as a part of this deal. And as you mentioned, of course, a large amount of aid will then be able to be transported into the Gaza Strip, where it is sorely needed for the civilians who are suffering dire humanitarian situation there that's been unfolding for weeks now. And of course, much needed fuel to be able to help run the hospitals, to help run telecommunication systems, and many other things, of course, generators to create power. So this landmark deal, the first cessation in hostilities, hopefully, as you mentioned, soon to begin within the next 24 hours.
Let's talk about timing. Is it clear yet when the first hostages will be released? Has there been any time suggested yet, more specifically?
Nothing more specific than that 24-hour window at this stage. A list of some 300 potential Palestinian prisoners has been released, and there is an idea that now Israeli citizens who may have been affected by something that the Palestinian prisoners were arrested for would be able to make a petition to the High Court. So there's a legal procedure, legal process, 24 hours being given for people to file a petition. Now, if, of course, there are no delays there, then we'll start hearing a more concrete timing. We do know that they're going to be releasing potentially 12 to 13 prisoners per day to allow for the truce to keep on going, a sort of piecemeal part of the process. It's also an incredibly difficult process to organise the release of these hostages, as you can imagine, being coordinated also with the Red Cross. Red Cross we've been hearing, able to access the hostages prior to them being released and be able to administer some medical care there. But it is going to be a days-long process, and as you mentioned, something that may be extended should more hostages be negotiated to be released. For every 10 hostages, there will be 1 more day of ceasefire.
Is there anything more specific you can tell us about the Palestinian prisoners due to be released as part of this agreement?
Well, the idea is that they will also be women and children, Anya. There are boys on the list, but no men. There have been 300 names, as I just mentioned, that have been potentially released. Now, that's of course to find 150 that no one will take issue with if they're released, but also to allow for wiggle room for more prisoners to be released should more hostages be released. As I just mentioned, there is a sort of second phase of the deal kind of tied into this one, where we could see potentially more hostages released in exchange for more prisoners and more ceasefire, up to a maximum of 10 days is what has been published in the cabinet agreement so far. So in terms of more details on those prisoners, the list has been published. The names are out there, but most people, I was sort of slowly looking through the list before coming on air, and you see a lot of people who are listed for quite petty crimes. I think it's unlikely that we'll see anybody who has perpetrated any serious crimes being released. And we know also, I should add, that nobody on a murder charge will be released.
Now, some members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition government did not support this hostage release deal. Can you explain to us why that is?
Well, it's seen as quite a contentious deal by many members of the far-right factions. We saw 3 members of the Otzma Yehuda, the Jewish Power Party, vote against the hostage deal. They say this is playing into the hands of Hamas, giving them a free kick, if you will, because they say that by giving them these ceasefires, that this humanitarian ceasefire, even though it's only for a few days, will allow them the opportunity to be able to rearm, to re-establish, reconnect and work out ways to go forward in this conflict, ways to be able to keep attacking the Israeli military in this war. So they were very against it, but in the end, an overwhelming majority did vote in favour, 33 versus 3. And even people who had slight concerns, including the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, it does appear that they were won over when departments like the Mossad and the Internal Security Services, the Shin Bet, said that they were in fact on board with this deal and they thought that it was good. That seemed to convince a majority of people to vote in favour. OK. Now, again, the Prime Minister, Israeli Prime Minister, had previously resisted entering into any kind of ceasefire deal. Why has he agreed to this one? I think it's the overwhelming pressure that he's been facing by the families of the hostages as well as the Israeli public. I mean, this has affected the psyche of Israel and Israelis, and I think there's been a lot of pressure on him. We've seen, protests, we've seen marches, and we've seen lobbying to particular ministers. We've seen the families, even in the Knesset, with heated debates with parliamentarians. So, the Prime Minister is under very, very severe pressure to try to get all of the hostages out, of course, but some hostages are seen as better than no hostages at all, and it is what he has been saying has been the second aim of this military operation. One, of course, being to eradicate Hamas, but the other, of course, to bring the hostages home. And he has to try and do everything that he can to make that happen. And we're seeing that the pressure has mounted and that days and days of negotiations, also negotiating with the right factions of his government to try to make sure that everybody is on board. And now, obviously, he's been able to agree, he's seen parts of the deal. He's been able to agree to this deal, I should say.
Thanks so much for that update, Rebecca. That's Rebecca Ritters reporting from Jerusalem. Now, we're hearing first reactions from those most directly affected by this deal, the relatives of the kidnapped. 63-year-old Gilad Korngold has 7 missing family members who are believed to be among the hostages held by Hamas. On Wednesday morning, Gilad described his feelings after news broke of the truce and the hostage deal between Israel and Hamas.
One side, I'm happy. Second, I'm worried, because nobody told me that my family will be there in this deal. There was 40 children inside Gaza, and they go to release only 30. Where are the others? I don't know, and I hope that everybody will release. It's terrible. 7 weeks. I think it's never happened in my life for sure, but in the history of the human being, like too many hostages, too many children, too many babies, too many women. I don't know how I feel. Right now, I want to be sure that my family will release, at least the grandsons and my daughter-in-law, and then we'll continue.
And for more, I'm joined now by our Middle East analyst, Shani Rozanes. Shani, good to see you. This deal has been weeks in the making. Obviously, the hostages were taken on October the 7th. Tell us more about what's led to this breakthrough.
Well, I think Israel has realized that its strong operation in Gaza is not yielding the result it wanted. At the beginning, there was still hope. There was one soldier they managed to, Israeli forces, IDF forces, managed to release. They realized this is not going to happen. There's growing international pressure to bring more humanitarian aid into Gaza. So it was clear this needs to happen, and Israel wanted clearly always to say, we're going to pound, we're going to crush Gaza, and we hope this will make Hamas agree to concessions and to bring some hostages to be released. And finally, Israel feels like this has yield the result that it wanted. There's also, for Israel, when it comes to the offensive, on the ground, it's the time to move from the north to the south of Gaza, and seemed to be a good timing. The key here is also for Hamas. Hamas wants and needs time to recoup, to get fuel, which is the most important thing they're also getting from the deal, aside from humanitarian aid. And it seems like both sides have realized 47 days of attacks and counterattacks have not really yielded much more. For this moment, there needs to be some change.
Now, we know that Israeli citizens have 24 hours to petition the High Court against the release
Correct.
of the Palestinian prisoners as part of this deal. How likely is that, and how would the High Court react?
We will see petitions. We already know of several organizations, mostly identified with the right wing, with the Jewish Power Party also, that we've heard that were objecting this deal. They will petition. The court will traditionally, before, have always said, this is no decision for the court. We pass the ball to the government. This is a fully political decision. We trust in the government to take the best decision on that. The procedure still needs to be made. They still need to petition. They will probably be rejected, but this also takes time that needs to be calibrated into the system of how, what the next steps are.
Tell us about the general response within Israel to this hostage deal. I mean, obviously, it's been a massively emotive and emotional situation in Israel.
It is. It's, the hostages' families have been living through hell in the last 47 days. And there's always, in Israel, there's a lot of emphasis on the psychological warfare of Hamas and the feeling that, this is an ongoing torture. And so now it's the same thing, because one of the reasons we understand there's been a delay in the agreement on the deal so far was that Hamas refuses to take responsibility on all the kids and their moms that are held in Gaza. They said, we know of only a certain amount of them. Israel was pushing them. You got to take responsibility on all of them. It's still unclear who of the 30 kids that we know of and their mothers will be released. And that also means that families, all these families that have been united in the last 47 days together in this effort to bring back their loved ones, they're torn apart between them. Some of them will get the best news that there are. Some of them will still be left hanging. And there's also the fundamental question. If I am a woman, there will be women released, but there's a man that is wounded and needs treatment. Why would I get a priority over that? These are internal moral dilemmas Israel is torn with. It's not a happy day. There aren't many happy days in Israel these days. And this one also very cautiously has a glimpse of hope, but I don't think we will see a lot of gushing and public, expressions of real joy. Everything is still very emotional and very tense.
Shani, Rozanes, thank you so much. We'll come back to you later, but for now, thank you. Now, in a statement before the cabinet meeting in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stressed that the pause in the fighting that's been agreed now does not mean the end of the war with Hamas. Let's take a listen.
We are at war, and we will continue the war. We will continue the war until we achieve all our objectives, eliminate Hamas, return all our abductees and missing persons, and ensure that there will be no element in Gaza that threatens Israel.
The Israeli Prime Minister there. Now, my colleague Terry Martin spoke earlier to Peter Lerner. He's a spokesperson for the Israeli military, the IDF, and he asked him when the first hostages are likely to be released.
Indeed, the framework is being processed. We have a due process in Israel, and of course, there's a legal process that is undergoing. As your reporter, Rebecca, announced, the names of the terrorists that are going to be released has been announced to the public, and anybody that has a problem with that list can appeal to the Supreme Court. And now, only after that process is completed will there be able to be an instruction to the military to hold its fire and to enable the release of the hostages and the terrorists into as agreed. The situation on the ground continues this morning to be a situation of combat. The IDF is continuing to pursue Hamas terrorists wherever they are hiding. We are destroying and dismantling the tunnels that we are encountering and engaging the enemy wherever they are.
Does the Israeli army have a role in the actual release process? Do you know, are the IDF forces going to be escorting the hostages out of Gaza, delivering the released Palestinian prisoners?
Well, of course, the situation is, first of all, the role is to hold fire once we receive that instruction. That in itself is a huge feat because we have to be in defensive positions. We need to make sure that what happened in 2014, where Hamas continued to attack us during ceasefires and abduct Israeli soldiers, doesn't happen again. So, of course, there is a significant role in maintaining and implementing the government's instructions, but we will do so nevertheless. The reality on the ground is one where, as you rightly quoted Prime Minister Netanyahu, is Hamas still need to go. Hamas still can never be allowed to wield this sword of death above our heads ever again, and that is why the pause in the hostilities, the pause in the combat will take place. But after that, we are intending on to continue our operation in order to relieve the region and bring home more hostages. The hostages, the youngest is 10 months old. This is the enemy that we are facing, and we are determined to bring all of the hostages home and create a better security regime for Israelis and Palestinians alike.
Now, part of the deal, as you mentioned, is a truce, a 4-day truce. Obviously, there's still fighting going on there. Is there fighting happening right now as we speak, Colonel Lerner?
The operations are ongoing and we are achieving our goals as we speak, absolutely. The reality on the ground is that Hamas are still engaging our forces and we are seeking them out and pursuing them wherever they are. They come out of tunnels, launch RPGs against our forces, and we are destroying the tunnel network as we speak. The situation of hostages has been, and it goes hand in hand with the operational achievements and directives that we've been guided to since the beginning of the war. And, we need the hostages home, and we also need Hamas to go. Wherever they are, they need to be pursued.
How concerned are you that Hamas will be able to use the truce to regroup and rearm, especially given that Israel has reportedly committed to at least a partial suspension of air reconnaissance during the truce?
So our activities will be paused in accordance to the government's directives. That pause is in order to enable the access of humanitarian goods, of supplies to the people of Gaza. The people of Gaza are not our enemy, but Hamas is the enemy. And of course, this enemy is a ruthless, merciless enemy, and we can't trust them, and we don't trust them. So of course, we will be watching very, very carefully and utilizing all of the tools available to us in order to address that threat. And indeed, it is a threat. But, the idea of and the possibility of bringing the hostages home in this case is of utmost importance, and that is why we are focused on bringing them home.
Now, your stated goal is to eliminate Hamas and remove any military threat from Gaza. How close are you Colonel Lerner, to achieving those goals?
So we understand that we have destroyed extensive presence in the northern Gaza Strip. Several battalions have been dispersed and destroyed and dismantled. We are engaging the tunnel warfare, the tunnel capabilities that Hamas had pre-positioned and built over the last 16 years in northern Gaza and throughout. And we are engaging them wherever they are. Indeed, they still have operational capabilities, but they are definitely on the run. And I would say the result of this agreement, the framework of releasing hostages, is a result of the extreme pressure that the IDF has put on Hamas, on its leadership, on its organization, and its ability to conduct its operations against us. So I would say we're moving closer every single day to achieving our ultimate goal of securing and restoring safety to the people of Israel, Israelis living in the communities surrounding the Gaza Strip, but not only, because they continue to fire rockets at us, and this is something that we won't accept.
And that was Peter Lerner, spokesperson for the Israeli army, the IDF, speaking to DW earlier. Now, Germany has welcomed the deal between Israel and Hamas. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock described the agreement to release some of the hostages as a breakthrough. She also urged for vital aid to be distributed among the people of Gaza. Germany, as well as the United States, the UK and the European Union, have rejected calls for a long-term ceasefire, arguing that it could give Hamas time to regroup. We're going to cross straight to DW's political correspondent Matthew Moore, who joins us now from our parliamentary studios here in Berlin. Matthew, has there been any other reaction yet from Berlin to the news of this hostage deal, apart from what we just heard?
Beyond that statement, there really hasn't been much reaction, Anya, not from the Chancellor or other government ministers, which I think perhaps speaks to a sense of cautious optimism. Some senior MPs, though, have been tweeting. Michael Roth, a former junior minister in the Foreign Ministry, who happens to be in Israel this morning, tweeted a photo of a meeting with relatives of hostages, and he wrote it was an important step, but we can only rest when all the hostages are free. Another MP tweeted saying it was a good deal, but that it was vital that, quote, Hamas butchers were held accountable and disempowered. Now, going back to Annalena Baerbock's statement, she specifically pointed out that being liberated would not heal the suffering that these hostages have endured. And again, she talked about the need to use the pauses to get aid to Gazans.
And what do we know about any German nationals who may be among the hostages?
Well, we know that of the some 240 hostages being held by Hamas, we understand that a small double-digit number of them hold German citizenship. Last month, actually, some of their relatives travelled to Berlin to lobby Chancellor Scholz and President Steinmeier and other government ministers to do all they can to bring their loved ones home. And for a German audience, it really brought the conflict closer to home. Relatives were on the talk shows, they were in newspapers, and basically part of their campaign was to keep their loved ones very much in the thoughts and minds of the German politicians, but also the German public. And I remember speaking to one kind of 90-year-old man whose sister and brother-in-law were held captive by Hamas, and he was telling me that, you know, he's helpless, but he got a few minutes with Chancellor Scholz, and he told them then that he wanted them to put pressure on Egypt and Qatar. And, you know, I got in touch with the family again and the representatives, and they say today they don't know whether their relatives will be the ones that will be liberated, and they're basically under a cloud of uncertainty, and they can only hope and wait.
So do we actually know if Germany has played any role at all in these hostage negotiations?
Well, from the beginning, German leaders have travelled through the region. Chancellor Scholz held talks with the Jordanian king, with the Egyptian president and the emir of Qatar, all key players in the region, and importantly, conduits to Hamas. In an interview with DW this week, the Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock was quite candid about the diplomatic negotiations, going kind of behind the scenes, saying how sensitive they are, how tricky it is to negotiate. She was talking about the fact that you're dealing with the political wing of Hamas, which is in Qatar, and it's very different and it's separate to the jihadist wing based in Gaza. And she talked about the efforts that the international community were carrying out, where they're trying to get Hamas to put all the hostages in Gaza in one place, just physically have them in one place. I think they felt that would improve their welfare and make it easier to ultimately secure all of their release and not just a few groups at a time. So again, just really underlining how fraught this is and coming to an agreement is.
OK. Now, we heard the Foreign Minister earlier saying that the truce should be used to get aid to Gazans. What help is Germany sending?
So officials, describe the situation in Gaza as disastrous, and they have basically pledged more and more money to United Nations and the Red Cross there. I think the number now that Germany is sending to organisations is 160 million worth of aid this year. Making sure it gets to Gazans is really important. They've appointed an envoy to coordinate that, to get the food, water, medical supplies to the people most in need and make sure that it doesn't go and end up in the hands of Hamas.
Matthew Moore, our political correspondent, thank you so much for that update. Now, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has welcomed the hostage deal as well between Israel and Hamas. In a statement, she said the European Commission will do its utmost to use this pause for a humanitarian surge to Gaza. Let's get more on the European reaction from DW correspondent Rosie Birchard, who joins us now from Strasbourg, which is where the European Parliament meets. Good to see you, Rosie. The EU has welcomed the hostage release at today's plenary debate. What more have you heard from EU officials there?
Officials and lawmakers from the EU have been gathering in this room behind me. And of course, the first message was really one of a wholehearted welcome. The EU said it, however, reiterates its call for all hostages to be released. And there was talk again of trying to use this expected pause as a way to surge humanitarian aid into Gaza. And with that in mind, the bloc's humanitarian aid chief called for greater humanitarian access into Gaza so that the aid the EU is sending can actually make it in. Now, beyond this, there's also been a bit of reflection here about the longer term, looking back and looking to the future. And the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, issued what I would say was a bit of an indictment of the bloc's foreign policy over the last few years, because he said basically for decades the EU has been talking about a two-state solution in the Middle East. That is what the bloc officially calls for. But he said that has been backed up by very little action.
I wanted to actually ask you about Josep Borrell's comments, because obviously very directly addressing the lack of unity in the EU when it comes to conflict. I mean, was that picked up in today's debate at all?
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting. Usually EU officials will try and kind of paper over the cracks in the division. Of course, 27 different member states have different opinions. But here, Borrell, the EU foreign policy chief, really acknowledged it. He said there has been disunity. The EU hasn't spoken with one voice. And he said that he's trying to converge so that the EU can bring some sort of diplomatic weight here. Now, since the start of this, since October 7th attacks, the EU has been united in its condemnation of Hamas, and it's united in its call for the release of hostages. But where it has been divided is in how to move forward, and particularly some EU member states have been calling for a ceasefire. For example, Ireland, Spain. Others have been much more reticent on that, fearing that could only serve to embolden Hamas, which is of course recognised by the European Union as a terror organisation. Now, with regards to all these divisions which are still in place, I think critics would say that while these important deals like the one we heard about today are being negotiated, it looks like the EU really seems to be much more of a bystander than any sort of a real major broker here. And that's what Borrell seemed to be referring to when he said he would like to try and converge positions in order to bring some sort of geopolitical influence in future.
OK. And Rosie, we've talked about this humanitarian surge to Gaza. Can you just give us a few more details about the humanitarian aid? What's been discussed about that?
So the European Union has around quadrupled its humanitarian aid to Gaza since October 7th. So that's things like medical supplies, things like food. And that's been pretty much accepted by all member states. It's not been really a big source of division. Where there has been more debate, Anya, is when it comes to development aid. So that's long-term funding, which goes to Palestinians. So, for example, for infrastructure, for education. And there we heard at the very early days after this original attacks by Hamas and a announcement that the EU would be reviewing its development aid to Palestinians. There was, in fact, an announcement that it would be suspended, and then that was retracted. Part of this whole, what looked at the time like a real foreign policy muddle. The EU has now announced that it's completed its review of that development aid funding and that it hasn't found any major cause for concern or any suggestion that funds have been diverted to Hamas. That was the fear that had initially been raised. But it does say it's going to be looking at a bit more measures for scrutiny, increased scrutiny for future for this kind of long-term development aid to Palestinians. That in itself has proved divisive because we have some saying, well, if you haven't found any cause for concern, this is not the time to be adding additional barriers. But of course, within this really heated geopolitical context, that's what the European Commission says is needed moving forward.
Rosie, thanks so much for that. Really appreciate it. That's DW's Rosie Birchard reporting from Strasbourg. And joining me again now in our studio here is DW's Middle East analyst, Shani. Rozanes, good to see you again, Shani. So, as we were saying earlier, we know that this deal has now been agreed, but obviously now it has to be implemented, doesn't it? So, you know, what could go wrong? What are the potential pitfalls here?
So many things can go awry. I mean, Israel has experience from 2014 when there was, back then, a ceasefire decided upon, and Hamas forces have attacked Israeli forces and killed one of Israel's soldiers. It still holds its body. It's a very painful, traumatic memory for Israel. So they're very much afraid of that, what's going to happen. I mean, can Hamas actually control all of the militants on the ground? Does he even have contact with all of them? Do they all agree in line with this deal? That's one thing, and that's why Israeli forces in the next 24 hours will try to bring themselves into safer positions because Israel does not plan to withdraw from the Strip. But furthermore, within the deal's mechanism were built securities to assure that to both sides that they will stick to their parts. So this is why we're talking about installments of 4 days. So every day, Israel first will need to cease the fire. I mean, we're starting tomorrow morning. Hamas, when he sees that, he will need to release the hostages only after they have been accepted by Israeli side, not just Red Cross, but by Israeli soldiers. Then Israel will release its prisoners. There's all these mechanisms. There's also inside the Gaza Strip another force. This is the Islamic Jihad, the Palestinian another militant armed group, and they're not officially part of Hamas, and they have the freedom, as they see it, to always try and act against Israeli forces. So that's also a very sensitive issue. Israel promised any violations will be responded with disproportionate amount of power, which we've seen Israel quite capable of applying in the last 47 days. So, the Qataris, the Americans, everybody who's brokering this deal are very much careful for the details. Everybody know it's going to be a very slow progress, one step after another.
OK. What about Israel's northern border? I mean, do we know if the agreement also includes Israeli actions against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon? And if so, how likely is Hezbollah to observe a truce?
Well, yesterday was one of the most deadly days along the border with Lebanon, between Israel and Lebanon. So surprisingly, Israel was expecting today to see a lot of retaliation. Actually, Hezbollah has been quite quiet today. We've also seen Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah meeting this morning with Hamas leaders, and we're expecting to see the Iranian foreign minister in Beirut this morning. So obviously, these two places are aligned. Officially, however, it's not part of the deal. We have seen Hezbollah seeing itself as the backup for Hamas. If there will be escalation, if there will be an unexpected turn of events, we probably will see also Hezbollah responding with an escalation. But so far, it seems like all sides that we have been seeing active in the last couple of weeks willing to slow things down to de-escalate. OK. So there's a sense of hope there, but you've also made very clear how complicated and tricky this situation is. Now, we are hearing that there's an option to extend the truce if Hamas releases additional hostages. Correct. So do you think that there is a realistic chance of a longer ceasefire coming up? Well, there is, because Hamas benefits from more time to regroup, recoup, and actually hoping that the longer Israel pauses its fighting, the harder it's going to get for it to resume fire because of international pressure, but also for technical reasons of what's happening on the ground. So the assumption is that Hamas will try to deliver 10 to 12 more hostages every day in return to a ceasefire. That's the formula agreed upon. The assumption is that it could bring Israel's released hostages to up to 80 and not just the 50 officially agreed upon. And this is also a bit of concern in Israel, mostly in the right-wing parts of the government. They are afraid Israel will be drawn, to follow Hamas's lead, to get in more and more hostages released, and will deviate from its main goal to get rid of Hamas's control over Gaza and not to resume the fight. That's the biggest concern. We've seen Netanyahu and all the cabinet yesterday meeting trying to reassure Israel is determined to resume fire once the deal is done. The key is we don't really know when the deal will be done.
All right.
I mean, how many days is it going to take?
OK, but we will be watching closely. Our Middle East analyst, Shani Rozanes. Thank you so much, Shani. Now, I'm very pleased to welcome Gili Roman, brother of Yarden Roman from Be'eri, a German citizen who was kidnapped with her mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Welcome to DW. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been almost 7 weeks of heart-wrenching uncertainty for you and the hundreds of family members whose loved ones were taken hostage by Hamas on October the 7th. Can I ask you, what are you feeling right now?
First of all, we are feeling thrilled. We were waiting for this deal. We were very firm that we support this deal for the last few weeks since it came into critical stages before approval. I think that it's our moral duty. I'm not talking only as a family member, but also just as a human being, as an Israeli and German citizen. It's our moral duty to start bring dozens of people back to make sure that they are safe and they are alive. And mostly when we're talking of the most vulnerable people like kids and women. And so I'm excited. I want to see them back already. I want to see the photos. I want to see this change of dynamics by talking only about war, started talking about life. Of course, at the same time, I'm pretty anxious. It's not clear if among the women that are related to this deal and the mothers, my sister Yarden, who is also a mother to a 3-year-old child, that she was able to rescue from being kidnapped, is among the people who are going to be released. So we are anxious and we are hopeful. It's a mix of many emotions.
I can imagine. I did want to ask you whether you had any more information about who exactly will be released.
No, I think that nobody has. Unfortunately, I assume that even our government doesn't know exactly who is going to be released, and we will know daily as the agreement describes, as far as my understanding. Only the day prior to the release, every day, we will know who are the people who are expected to be released. It is horrible, it is painful, but this is terrorism. This is mere psychological terrorism, and we all need to be resilient and strong in order to go through it. This is how terrorism is constructed.
I presume as well that then you won't know anything about the hostages' condition, whether they're in good health, until they actually are back.
Well, hopefully they will be finally be open to visits of the Red Cross. So far, the Red Cross has done almost nothing for the Israeli humanitarian issue of this conflict, and they will, according to the declaration of our Prime Minister yesterday, they will be given permission to visit and take care of the hostages that will not be released. So I believe that is a step forward.
Can I ask whether you have been consulted or in any way involved in these negotiations to get the hostages back?
No, let's not exaggerate. Nobody is consulting me in this level. We're talking about the highest levels of professional officials. It's not even a political negotiation. It's really an expert negotiation. Of course, we try to give our 10 cents for this matter and deliver some messages, but it's way above our level. And I think it should be like this, and that's what enables it to be a professional negotiation and to get to the line where we are at the moment.
OK. Now, what about the remaining hostages not due to be released in the coming days? Is there any sense at all whether they are still alive even?
Unfortunately, there is no clear answer to this question. The assumption is that many more hostages are alive beyond these 50 hostages. The agreement also talks about hostages beyond the first 50 or so, that if Hamas will be able to gather them and to assemble them towards release, we'll be able to continue this humanitarian pause day by day. We hope to see that. We really hope to see that this not going to end after 4 days, that there's going to be severe continuation of that. And then we'll understand how many people, at least among the category of women and children, are alive and available for release. Now, I believe that much more people are alive and can be released, and that might take a while longer. But it doesn't mean that after this deal, this is the end of the civilians and soldiers that can be saved. I think that we will need to be ready for more pressure and more resilience and patience until everybody will be released.
I know that many of the affected families have expressed concerns that the Israeli military can't keep pursuing its military campaign against Hamas while at the same time trying to secure the safe release of the remaining hostages. But we have heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I quote here, to continue the war to destroy Hamas. Can I ask you for your reaction to that?
I think that our cabinet has proven so far that the two goals of dismantling Hamas and protecting our borders and our security, and the ultimate and very sacred goal of bringing the hostages back are not conflictual so far. The military pressure, is the only language we see that Hamas understands, and that's what brought us to the point where we can release so many of our civilians at the moment. So I think that those two goals, as the Prime Minister indicated, are not conflictual, but integrated into each other. At the same time, it's important to say that it's the military's, the IDF responsibility to conduct this operation in a very calculative, careful manner. And I think they have proven to be doing that so far. And my expectation and even demand that it will be conducted as such also in the long run. But we want to see all the hostages back. We understand that it might come with difficulties to the military, and we see already that they're willing to do this move. But we also want to see a secure and safe Israel for all citizens.
Gili Roman, brother of kidnapped Yarden Roman, I'd like to thank you so much for your time and for speaking to us here on DW. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.